So today we're going to talk about adding and subtracting fractions when they have the same and different signs. So to begin, we have a warm-up, because if you are going to add and subtract fractions, you need to know how to add and subtract integers proficiently before you begin trying fractions. So pause the video, try the problems, then come back and check your answers. So looking at our answers, number 1 is -3, number 2 is 15, number 3 is 1, number 4 is -10, number 5 is -7, and number 6 is -17. Picture yourself on the number line if you are still struggling with these answers. Always, always, always resort back to that number line and try to visualize, what are you actually doing? Are you moving down or up? Did you turn around or not? So we first have some vocabulary. We have a rational number, which is any number that could be written as a ratio of two integers. Okay, essentially it's saying it could be a fraction. We have some examples of fractions, and you're going to learn more about rational numbers and irrational numbers next year. And then on this slide we have our key ideas. We are going to be adding rational numbers, adding fractions, and subtracting our rational numbers or our fractions. Now, to add and subtract fractions, you do the same thing as if you were adding and subtracting integers, except they're fractions now. So you're going to apply your fraction rules as well as your adding and subtracting integer rules. So before we can actually start adding and subtracting fractions, we first need to remember some basics that we've learned in the past. So if I gave you 2/7 plus 3/7, what would that equal? Well, we know our denominator is going to stay the same, and we then just add our numerators. 2 plus 3 is 5. We get 5/7. What would happen if I gave you 3/4 plus 3/4? Well, denominator stays the same, and we simply add the numerator. 3 plus 3 is 6, so we have 6/4. However, that answer is okay, but we could reduce it by dividing top and bottom to make it smaller. Both our numbers are even, so we could divide them both by 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 3/2 is our reduced fraction. You could change it to a mixed number, but I won't make you guys do that, just because improper fractions are what you're typically going to work with in the future, and that's what I prefer to work with as an adult, so that's what I would like you guys to work with as well. Last but not least, you need to know how to take 5 and 3/4, our mixed number, and change it into an improper fraction. Remember, you multiply 4 times 5 and then add the numerator. 4 times 5 is 20, plus 3 gives me 23. It's all over 4 still. If you can recall these different skills, you can add and subtract integers when they're fractions without any problem. Our first problem today is -1 1/5 plus -3/5. So, what I like to do is I like to always write my mixed numbers as improper fractions to start. So I'm going to multiply and add. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 1 is 6. I have 6/5. And then we have plus -3/5. However, you can't forget the negative. It's -6/5 plus -3/5. Now that we have our common denominator, we can go ahead and add our fractions. We have to take -6 plus -3 gives me -9/5. It can't reduce, and so that's my final answer. If you switch -9/5 to a mixed number, you get -1 and 4/5. So either of these answers would be correct. Our next problem is 2 plus -7/2. However, 2 isn't a fraction. So what we need to do is we need to write 2 as a fraction. Remember, to write a number as a fraction, you put it over 1. So we can rewrite 2 as 2 over 1 plus negative 7/2. Now, notice we don't have our common denominator. We need to figure out what number could 1 and 2 both multiply into. Well, if I think about multiples of 1, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. And multiples of 2 are 2, 4, 6, and so on. The smallest number I see in both is 2. So my common denominator is going to be a 2. To make our first fraction over 2, I have to take 1 times something to make it 2. I multiply it by 2, so I also have to multiply the top by 2. 2 times 2 is 4. The second fraction I actually didn't have to change, so I still have a negative 7 on top. Now I have common denominator, so I can go ahead and add my fractions. Denominator is still 2, and 4 minus 7, or 4 plus negative 7, same problem, gives me a negative 3. My answer is negative 3/2. If you switch it to a mixed number, you would have negative 1 and 1/2. Either answer would be acceptable. Next, I would like you to answer number 1 and number 2 on your own. You can cross out number 3 since it was from the last slide. Pause the video, answer the problems, and come back and check your answers. Remember, the first thing you do is you go from a mixed fraction, a mixed number, change them into an improper fraction. Once you do that, you find a common denominator. And then you go ahead and add. You'll notice that for number 1, I had to make common denominator, so I started step 2 actually. So I had negative 7/8 plus 2/8, which gives me a total answer of negative 5/8. And for number 2, I had to change my mixed number into an improper fraction, which was a negative 19/3. Remember, don't lose your negative sign. Plus 20/3, they already had the common denominator, and when I added them together, I get 1/3. Moving forward, we're going to be talking about subtracting fractions. So, first recall our warm-up. We had negative 5 minus negative 6. Remember, this minus negative has us do a double twist, and so we really can think about it as adding positive 6. So it's the same as negative 5 plus 6. This problem over here is the same idea. Negative 4 1/7 minus negative 6/7. We have to do the double turn, and so it's really the same as adding a positive 6/7. I have negative 4 1/7 plus 6/7. From here, we do the same as what we would do with adding. Make your mixed number into an improper fraction. So 7 times 4 is 28, plus 1 is 29 over 7. Don't lose your negative sign. Then I have plus 6/7. They already have a common denominator, so I can go ahead and add. Negative 29 plus 6 is a negative 23. It can't reduce, and it's my final answer. On your own, I would like you to answer numbers 1, 2, and 3. Pause the video, complete the problems, come back and check your answers. So looking at our answers, for number 1, remember minus negative 1/3 is just adding a positive 1/3, so we had 2/3. Number 2, we had to make it into a mixed number and find a common denominator, which ended up getting us negative 25 over 6. And number 3, we had to make them into improper fractions and also find a common denominator, which got us -3/4. Last but not least, we have to find the distance between numbers on our number line. You always, if you have two different numbers, take their difference to find the distance. It kind of sounds the same. Difference to find the distance. And remember, difference is when we subtract numbers. So if you notice here, we have 2 1/3 and -2 2/3. And it doesn't matter which number you put first to take their difference. They started with the -2 2/3, and they subtracted 2 1/3 from that to find the difference. Yesterday, when we talked about airplanes and submarines, we had our airplane flying in the air. I'm not an artist. And it was 25,000 feet above the ground. Then we had our ground. Then we had a submarine underwater. And it was 600 feet below the water. And so because it's below water, we would represent it as -600 because it's underneath where our ground is. Now, to find their difference, we subtracted. We took 25,000 minus our -600, which we said was the same as adding 600. This is the same idea. If we would put our positive number first, 2 1/3, and subtract our -2 2/3, notice minus our negative is actually just adding. So we can think of the same problem as 2 1/3 plus 2 2/3. So if we add these together, we can make them into improper fractions, which gives me 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7/3, plus 2 times 3 is 6, plus 2 is 7 8/3. 7 plus 8 is 15/3. Now, we can actually reduce 15/3. A fraction, remember, is just dividing. 15 divided by 3 is 5. So the distance between our numbers would be 5. It helps sometimes to draw pictures if you're confused.